Here with Mickey Mikkelson. He is a publicist with Creative Edge Publicity. He's an expert at promoting authors and books. And we're talking about how authors can nail that media interview and what to expect when doing a book tour. Something I put in air quotes because I know that's changed so much in conception over the years. Mickey, how you doing?
I'm good. How are you? Thanks for having me today, Desiree.
I am very good. Well, thank you. You are an amazing publicist. You own an incredible company, and you have so much to offer to the writers out there. I hear it all the time. People are asking, well, how do they, answer questions during media interviews? How should they dress? What should the lighting be like? All of that kind of stuff. So can you tell me, what do you think? What are some of the things that authors should do to prepare for their media interviews, even before the publicist starts booking them?
I think it's important that authors stay true to themselves, stay real, not get wound up with how big or how small the opportunity is, and really just showcase themselves and their branding. I mean, there's always this misconception about, well, I have to talk about the book and I have to promote the book and I have to get the book and get that out there. Media interviews aren't about the book. They're about the branding of the author themselves. They're about getting people to know who those individuals are. The book is second nature and you should talk about it, but really a media interview is all about getting to know the person who writes that book and that aspect. So spontaneity is key in my opinion.
Yeah. And when somebody, a reader, feels like they know the author, then that translates into not just somebody who's going to read the book, but somebody who could be a fan, follow that author, read other books, right?
Exactly. And I get this question all the time from authors. Well, Mickey, you've got me booked in this TV show. Can I get the questions beforehand? I'm like, why? Why do you want that? Because the minute you get those questions, you know what happens, Desiree? You start overthinking the answers. And then you flummox it on a national TV show. Whereas if you don't have those questions, you could be yourself. You could talk about whatever you want to talk about. You can make sure that you're covering all the bases that you want to cover. Because really that interview shouldn't end until you've talked about the things that you want to convey over. So, yeah.
Great advice. What media training do you advise for your authors? How do you prepare them for their talking points? Do you do any kind of training or give them any advice?
I honestly don't. I mean, to be honest, and maybe that's a bad answer, but I just tell people to be themselves. I tell them to make sure they look professional, obviously. I tell them to thank the hosts. But really, it's all about making sure that they're professional in nature, that they're talking, show up for the interview first and foremost. But don't use a lot of ums, don't do a lot of that. Just make sure you're conveying yourself professionally, and you're not degrading the host while you're talking. It's all about keeping yourself live and keeping yourself professional all the way throughout the engagement. And if you do that, there's a really good chance, if it's a good interview, they're going to bring you back for your second, third, fourth, fifth book.
You mentioned something about, some interviews are big, some are small. And the late, great Erwin Zucker, who was a friend of mine and a big supporter of the BookFest, I remember him always saying to his authors and saying to me, hey, even those small interviews matter. They count. Even a fledgling podcast matters. Would you like to talk about that a little bit?
I'm so glad that you brought this up, because part of my frustration with working with individuals and working with some big name authors, they're like, well, I only want to do articles or episodes or interviews with a reach of 50,000 or more. But the problem with that is, number one, those are very, very few and hard to come by because so many other authors are targeting those shows. But you're not really building out your media resume by doing that either. Just because you're on a small show, it doesn't necessarily mean that your episode is only going to get 15 views. It's what you do with it, to be honest, and showcase that. And you don't know what media people are watching that podcast that only gets 15 views. It might be a nationally syndicated show that looks at you and says, wow, this person's got it together. And look how much attention they're giving to this small opportunity. Imagine what they're going to do on my show. So my advice to authors, if you get an opportunity, doesn't matter how small, doesn't matter how big, treat it like you would treat Oprah or Ellen or NBC or CBS or CNN. Because it could lead to something like that.
Yeah. Excellent advice. I think sometimes authors and folks in general don't realize that those producers, the people that are behind the scenes, the bookers, all of those people know each other.
They do.
And they talk.
They do.
And that's important because you don't want to blow. If you want to be on a big show, I had this happen once. An author wanted to be on this big show. I booked them on a show where the producer was doing that small show as fun, Yeah. It was but they wanted to be on this show and they poo-pooed that interview. And that was not a really good situation for them. And that leads into what you're talking about.
Yeah. I mean, small can lead to medium and medium can lead to large. But if you don't do the small, you're not going to get the others. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter your reputation. Doesn't matter how good an author you are. Doesn't matter how professional you look in branding. If you treat that small opportunity as what it really is a small opportunity, I think authors are going to fail, especially indies, because it's already harder for them to get into that media marketplace.
Do you want to discuss some of the wonderful niches that actually exist in some of those smaller shows? Podcasts can really dig down deep into a specific interest, and that can be beneficial too, don't you think?
I do. And there's actually some of my authors, they refuse to go on mainstream TV. They refuse to go on some of the bigger national programs and shows because they want to go on smaller genre reader focused opportunities where the people watching those shows are, number one, book buyers, and number two, true and captivating readers and fans of those authors' works. So it's effective. I have an author who'd much rather go on, and he's a fantasy author. He'd much rather go on a smaller fantasy related podcast than something as big as the Today Show, because he knows that that target market is his fan base, and he's going to sell books as a result of that. So it's here or there, but yeah, it's true.
Yeah, smart, very smart. And then smart. When that show gets picked up and turns into the next Netflix show or something like that, then you can do the big ones. But you're right, you need to build the fan base.
100%. You nailed it, Desiree.
Yeah, you and me, same page.
Good. Always. Yeah.
You mentioned, the look and feel, the setting, the lighting, all of that. And I know the tech sometimes scares authors too, especially nowadays when we're on StreamYard. Big shout out to our friends at StreamYard. A lot of people are using Zoom. Any advice about the tech and the setup for authors?
Again, I think it's make sure you have a decent microphone. Make sure you've got a computer that's going to be showing you explicitly. Make sure that your technology works and you're able to navigate around that technology, because the worst thing in the world is getting booked for a show, logging on to that show, and then having to cancel that interview midstream because you can't figure out the technology piece. It's no different than with an indie author, and I'm focusing on these for a reason, because it's so hard for them to make it in some aspects. But it's no different than an indie author putting out a decent book cover, putting out a decent bio, and not using a selfie for a headshot. It's the same kind of a thing, right? So yeah.
Okay, yeah. You brought it up. I didn't plan on talking about headshots.
Sorry, Desiree.
No, let's because that you got me right there. The headshot, the bio, all of those materials. Do you want to talk about preparing those in advance?
Yeah, so I work with lots of indie authors, and some of them, when we have our interviews, consultation interviews, they show me the book cover, and I ask them, well, how'd you make this book cover? Well, I made it myself. I'm like, oh, okay. I can't market this. I can't go to Publishers Weekly with this book cover and ask them to review it. No matter how good the book is. You may have spent a fortune on formatting and editing and all of that, but if you're making your own book cover and it looks like a handmade book cover, it's not feasible. It's not marketable. I represent an author who actually changed their book covers after that discussion.
Mhm.
And when I first worked with them, I couldn't get them anything for 2 months. I couldn't get them a single thing. So we re-upped the book covers. She paid substantial money to get it redone. We relaunched the book. Next thing you know, she's an American indie on national Canadian television, and she's been featured on multiple guest posts. And all she had to tweak was her book cover to make that happen, because everything else was already in place. So I guess and I'm glad you brought this up and let me elaborate on, professionalism is always key. Image is always key. The book doesn't have to be traditional, but it has to look traditional in order for indies to have success. Again, my opinion. But
Yeah, excellent advice. How about tips or advice for the author doing their very first interview? What sage advice might you have for them?
It's okay to be nervous. Just be yourself. Have fun. Get in tune with the interviewee, and be professional while you're doing that. Answer the questions the way you would answer them if you're talking to me or talking to a fan. Same thing. And don't ever try to second guess your answers, because the minute you start second guessing your answers, guess what happens? Your level of confidence goes down, and it'll show up in that interview, whether it be audio or video. So yeah, have an agenda and follow it.
How about tips or advice for the author doing their 100th interview and they are getting burnt out? And how do they keep it fresh?
I think that they have to talk about fresh ideas and talk and reference things that they haven't explained in other interviews. I represent New York Times bestseller Tosca Lee, and she's a master of this. She has 6 books optioned for TV right now. And that same question comes up all the time. How did you get your book into the film aspect? But she talks about other things revolving around her books, and it's a different interview every single time. And it works wonders, and it's phenomenal. And she's been asked back, not just because of her accolades, but because of the kind of interview that she puts out there. So fresh and new always, and think creatively outside the box when you're talking.
Yeah, excellent. Okay, we're going to end this on any big don'ts that you have for interviews. Anything that somebody should probably never do.
Never second guess yourself. Never interrupt the host midstream. Never use long pauses when answering, because then the host thinks you're done and then you've cut them off as you're reassess your answer. And obviously, my biggest one, and my clients know this, never no show.
Excellent. Mickey Mikkelson, thank you for joining us here during the BookFest. Appreciate that.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure.
And coming up next, more info for the writing community during the BookFest adventure, fall 2022.